business owners likely will have only one shot to sell a business. Most don't understand what drives value and how buyers look at a business. Until now. Welcome to the How to Sell a Business podcast, where every week we talk to the subject matter experts, advisors, and those around the deal table about how to sell at maximum value. Every business will go to sell one day. It's only a matter of when. We're glad you're here. The podcast starts now.
Over my 30-year career, I've had the opportunity to know lots of business bankers. Some are really good and some not so much. And the ones that really make the greatest difference are the ones that have been in the trenches, and those that can offer something more than just simply finding money. It's somebody that can help with structure, somebody that can help with seller challenges, someone that can help with just what does the future of this business look like when I use, in this case, SBA financing. And so enter Heather Endresen. So she is the president of Viso Business Capital. And it's a new company. She was with the number one SBA lender, and she saw a need and she is filling it. So Heather's been in the business for 30 years. So she's seen, ups and downs and the ins and outs of SBA lending. So she has started and managed, like I said, the SBA lending departments for banks of all kinds of sizes. And most recently, she was the top producer at Live Oak Bank, the number one SBA lender in the nation. She launched Viso simply to simplify the loan process for acquisitions for entrepreneurs so they can spend more time, on due diligence and less time trying to find funding. So she and I we had a great conversation, and I'm so grateful for the time that she spent with us. And I can tell you that she's a different kind of lender, and that's what the kind of person that you're looking for. There's good lenders, but there's a different tier, and Heather is certainly in that bucket. I also should mention that she is a fourth host of one of my favorite podcasts, Acquisitions Anonymous. And so you can hear her over there talking about different deals and structures and how perhaps they might, how Viso might source funding for the deals that they're looking at. So I'm 100% certain that you will get all kinds of good value nuggets from Heather, and as much as I did. And I'm 100% certain that you'll enjoy this conversation I had with Heather Endresen of Viso Business Capital. Well, welcome to the show, Heather.
Thank you for having me, Ed.
And congratulations on the launch of Viso. Tell us about it and what you're going to do with it.
Well, thank you. And I'm super excited about Viso. It is basically a loan brokerage that's focused on acquisition loans, mostly SBA. There's a number of reasons why I'm not taking on very many conventional engagements. So it's mostly SBA acquisition loans. And my aim at Viso is to save buyers time during their precious 90 days of diligence. They've got 90 days to go figure out everything they need to know before they close on this deal. And they need to spend less of it talking to 4 different banks and more of it doing diligence. So that's my main goal.
Well, over the years, the SBA, whoever the buyer's working with the SBA, it is so important that the sellers understand what the buyers are going through. And that's part of the reason why I'd like to, I want to be seller focused. I mean, we do have a lot of buyers that listen to this, but nevertheless, I do think that sellers need to understand from what the buyers are going through. So I guess that the first question I want to talk about is what are the programs that the SBA offers? I know you have your 7A and your 504, but and please talk. Don't let me answer for you. So go ahead. What are the programs?
So the main program is the 7A, the SBA 7A. That's going to be the big loan that really is the bulk of the transaction. It's a term loan. It's a 10-year term loan. 504, that's only for real estate. So they only really comes into play. And sellers, if you're going to sell the real estate and the business at the same time, my advice is split the contract. If the buyer's going with a 504 for the real estate and a 7A for the business, they might close at different times. The 504 takes longer. And so it's nice to be able to close your enterprise sale with your 7A loan. That's a little faster, and then allow the real estate a little more time to close. I've closed a few that way. And then you have another program called the SBA Express, and that is usually used for working capital lines of credit. It only goes up to $350,000. So it's really meant for smaller lines of credit. But a lot of acquisition buyers end up with one of those that they can access post-close. It's not something that's funded at close, but they can draw down on it as they need for seasonality or carrying receivables, things like that.
I got it. So switching back to the 504. Now, there's a threshold, if I'm not mistaken, where they blend the 7A and the 504. What is that threshold? Do you know?
Yes. Okay. So the SBA has a $5 million limit on the 7A program. And that effectively, it's a 75% guarantee. So that means $3,750,000 is the limit that they'll guarantee. If you do a 504 and a 7A at the same time, and you get one approved before the other, and now I've forgotten which one it is, but I mean like a minute before or a day before, it doesn't matter. I think it's the 7A first, actually. You can actually get an additional $1,250,000 worth of SBA runway. So it's a way of doing a little bit more SBA guarantee that makes the banks more comfortable, a little bit easier to get the whole thing done. Okay.
Now, I thought there was, and again, I'm putting you on the spot. We've had some deals that there's been a 17-year-old blended deal.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So that's when you're going to put real estate and enterprise in one 7A loan.
Oh.
So whenever you're going to buy both at the same time, close them at the same time, and you put them in one 7A loan, there's two things that might happen with the term. Instead of just a 10-year term, you're going to get 25 years applied to the real estate and 10 applied to the enterprise. And it's a blended average term. Maybe it ends up 14 or 17 years. There's one other little advantage there, though. Only kind of works in the West where real estate is more expensive. But if you have a business where the real estate is worth more than the enterprise, it's going to sell for more. Mm-hmm. The buyer can put them both in one loan, and the loan term is 25 years for the whole thing. So they get an advantage when they buy real estate that's worth more.
And is that fixed money, or is that still variable rates?
It can be either, but most banks prefer to stay variable. But during this run up, they were offering 3 and 5 year fixed rates. So usually the banks will give an option.
Got it. Well, a lot of sellers these days don't know that there's big changes going on. Mm-hmm. They see the prime going up, and I guess that's probably the first place we should at least poke at is, the people that you're working with, or where you're sourcing deal funds, where, what's their appetite for today's transactions? Because we know borrowing power has been reduced.
Yes, it has. So the buyers of today, of this moment, have to find a way to structure less debt as a percentage of the bank debt, anyway, as a percentage of the overall transaction. So they might need more seller note, unfortunately for the sellers. They also might raise more equity. So this is something a lot of sellers don't realize. There are serial small business investors now, lots of them, who are wealthy individuals who have made lots of small bets, if you will, investing in folks buying small companies. So strangely enough, it is maybe almost a little bit easier for a buyer to raise equity for a good deal than it is to raise debt. And the reason for that is equity has upside. If they do really well, the equity can make more. Debt doesn't. Debt only has downside.
Yeah. Have you seen what's the buyer typically paying for that? It's basically mezzanine. Well, I guess it's not mezzanine debt. It's
actually equity.
Yeah.
The terms vary. We've talked to a lot of investors, and I keep a pretty good database of investors. it's usually some kind of a preferred return. So they'll get some preferred equity with maybe an 8% coupon or 9 these days.
Okay.
It's not like debt, though. They don't have to pay it if the cash flow is not there. They won't get that until the end, until there's a sale or an exit or whatnot. But it's not cheap money, but it's still possible for them to get equity that they don't have to repay on a monthly basis, so that there's more cash flow left for the debt payments.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I think we're going to see a lot of that, and I think you are too. That or you feel the same, that we're going to see a lot of those investors are going to come out of the woodwork, because that's the only way that these things are actually going to pencil out at the value, that the sellers want.
Yeah.
Which now brings us to the next thing of all these new SOPs that are coming out from the SBA. And I know there's, they've got 2 months before it actually is, I don't want to say ratified, but before it goes into, law, so to speak. But what can you talk a little bit about some of the bigger issues or opportunities that are going to help these sellers?
Right. So we've been for SBA size transactions, which is kind of any business under maybe 2 million of EBITDA, right? The buyers are most likely going to be using SBA. We've been having to structure deals within these SBA rules for so long that it's really going to be interesting now that so many of them have just opened wide up how different deal structures are going to be possible. So the first one that's really interesting is rollover equity, or the seller retaining some ownership of the business. The old rule has been sellers have to sell everything. They cannot keep any rollover equity, and they have to fully exit the business of any kind of roll in 12 months. Both of those are gone. Those rules are gone. So seller can roll over, seller can stay. Very interesting.
Yeah. What do you think? How do you think I was debating on, I think that works really well with shareholder buyouts. I think that, some junior guys buying out, though, like in our practice, we have, some older guys that eventually are going to exit. It makes a lot of sense, because from a loyalty and transition, my team would look to me. You know what I mean? And we wouldn't have that. But I'm just curious, like a third party comes in and says, look, we're going to roll over this equity. You're going to keep your 20% or 19%. And I'm just curious to know, and it's a crystal ball thing. I mean, there's no way to know where the staff loyalty lies. You know what I mean? That's a hard one, don't you think?
I do. I think that whether to roll over equity or not, and this comes from the buyer's perspective and the seller's perspective, has everything to do with the chemistry between the two individuals or more people, and what the vision for the future is. If it's a shared vision, it can be great. Like I've definitely done rollover equity in the non-SBA side of my career. And I've seen both kinds of outcomes, though. I've seen really great outcomes and really not great outcomes. And it usually comes down to, if it's not great, it comes down to the people just didn't, they weren't on the same page, or they became not on the same page at some point.
Yeah. Well, I think it's hard for employees, especially if there's any kind of change coming. But again, it's back to the transition. The way you handle post sale does matter, and that person, when you're, it's so funny. We keep talking about these business owners, especially the 70-year-old plus. I mean, every employee wants to know what's going to happen to their job. They can see the guy or the woman aging. And so bringing someone else on and being able to stay visible in the company, to me, I think that there's opportunity for, I want to say, an amplified, favorable transition under those circumstances. So I hope that works.
You could even foresee breaking a deal into a couple of parts, right? Somebody buys in a small percentage and stays working side by side with the seller, maybe for a year or two, and then is ready to buy them out maybe the rest of the way, you could do that. And I think that would absolutely be a better outcome for a buyer and the staff, like you said, to kind of ease into it. I think there's a lot of interesting possibilities that way.
So let's talk eligibility for a second. So I often hear either my business is too big for the SBA or my business is too small for the SBA. Can you talk about eligibility requirements?
Yeah, and it doesn't usually come down to the actual eligibility rules. So there is you can Google this term, but you can do SBA size standards. And there's two different ones. One is based by NAICS code, and it's either dollars of revenue or number of employees, depending on the industry. And then there's something called the alternative minimum size standard. And most of the companies that we're going to be talking about that have less than $2 and $3 million of EBITDA are perfectly below those standards. So eligibility wise, most of these companies are going to be fine. It's bank credit appetite that sort of drives though whether a buyer can get funding, right? Sure. And so banks tend to favor different things. Banks don't like lending on really small acquisition loans. They might do other small SBA loans, but the fact is that putting together an acquisition SBA loan is very expensive for a bank. It's an awful lot of work for everybody, really, but it's also an awful lot of work for a bank. So below a certain dollar amount, that's usually $500,000 of loan amount. Most banks don't want to do that. It's too small.
And the funny, I'm glad you shared that, because one of the things that always bothers me is just say no. Don't, just if it's not in your wheelhouse or if it's too small, just say so. And so often, the bank or the BDO just doesn't want to, hurt the feelings, or I'm not really sure.
I have another reason.
Please.
Well, I've been in banking too long. So it's because there's a lot of salespeople. They're salespeople.
Yep.
So they want to make their pipeline look full.
Oh.
And then have excuses later on why deals fell apart. So there's a certain percentage of salespeople out there who will just take anything in, throw it in their pipeline to make themselves feel good or look good, even though they know deep down they're never going to get that deal done.
That's a good point. So for the sub $500,000 deals, so that's, your rule of thumb is roughly 50% of revenue. So $1 million business, so it's $500,000. Where do those people get funding?
It's not easy. I mean, I get calls, I have for years, and my best advice to people looking for a good deal to get done on a small loan is CDFIs, certified, community development financial institutions. A lot of them have an SBA license for smaller deals, and that's kind of their mandate. But you have to find one that's your deal fits in their geography and everything else, but that's probably the best bet.
I get it. One of the things I was talking to another lender this morning about ESOPs. It seems as though ESOPs are becoming more and more favorable with the SBA and various lenders. Are you seeing the same?
Yes. I mean, the SOP has a whole section now on how you can lend to an ESOP transaction. So they've made the rules more favorable. I think what I've understood is that it's the same thing that we just talked about. Below a certain size, it's just too expensive to do. So, and I'm not even sure exactly what that size is, but it's more than 500.
Well, I'll tell you what, we have in the last, 6 months. I mean, people have shown up at our doorstep about unwinding they want to sell and they're an ESOP, and somebody got a hold of them and just jammed ESOP down their throat, and it just wasn't the right tool, the right exit tool for the situation, and they got into it. It's still profitable, but boy, oh boy, it was just a mess. But at any rate, okay. So can you tell me, from a seller's standpoint, every seller just, as soon as they go under LOI, they think it's immediate. All of a sudden, everybody should just be moving as fast as they can, and they don't understand this especially this financing component. So I wanted to talk about the application process and what is a typical timeline that somebody should anticipate.
Well, let's start with the timeline. I know most LOIs are going to be 90 days of exclusivity, but we've actually got a couple of surveys we've done, and then just our own anecdotal experiences doing lots of deals as lenders. They usually take between 90 and 120 days.
That hurts.
Yeah, okay. and it kind of goes to what you're saying. This process is lengthy, and no one party is in control of the whole thing. So you're waiting for the other party; they're waiting for you, et cetera. They're waiting for the bank. The bank's waiting for someone within the bank. So it causes all these little small delays that add up. But it can be done in 90 days. So I'll give you, like, if you're wanting to sell and you want to close in 90 days, here's how it can work. You want to make sure your buyer has already got an idea of where they're going to go for the debt. Hopefully it's Viso, because I'm going to shop all the banks for them.
Nice.
But hopefully they figured out where they're going to go before the LOI is signed. They go straight there they say, I've got a signed LOI. I'm ready to get started. They make sure they get a term sheet from banks within the first week. It shouldn't take longer than that. As long as the seller's giving them access to the tax returns and all that stuff that they need. So that's the other thing, seller. Don't make sure your deal room's organized. I'm sure Ed is going to make sure of that. But they don't all have Ed, unfortunately. No. So if seller's real organized, given everything, term sheets can be out in a week, and then it can go into underwriting. Now, in underwriting, banks are going to ask a lot more in-depth questions. Sellers need to be quick with the responses if they can, and provide the additional backup support to some answer that the bank might want to see. And there might be a quality of earnings report that the buyer is going to engage. So it's like financial due diligence. And the seller has to give them access to the books so they can do that and answer questions. So it's pretty time intensive for sellers at that point.
Well, and the funny thing is, everybody talks about this. Everybody talks about the things that you're going to have in order to, and not only survive due diligence, but in order to keep the deal together. I mean, you're talking 120 days, and that's customary. And the funny thing is that, when you start crossing the year's halfway mark or crosses over a year in, now all of a sudden everybody wants to talk about, what's happened in the last 120 days while your foot's been taken off the gas because you didn't prepare well enough in advance, and it's a landmine that can be sidestepped if you just take just a little bit of time getting your deal room together and going through a process rather than, I'll solve. And this is one of the next questions is, everything seems to be the buyer's problem. And the seller fails to realize that at least 40% of the buyer's problem is his or her problem, And so I guess that's what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is how those sellers, and I think you pointed on, a number of good things as far as getting the deal room together and being prepared. Is there anything else that the seller can do to make the lender and the buyer's job easier as part of this process?
Yeah, I think it's just be prepared for how much time, you're going to have to dedicate in those few weeks that the deal is in underwriting. You are going to have to, unfortunately, be distracted by that process. And you never know when the questions are going to come, but you want to be able to stop and whatever you're doing and try to answer those questions as clearly as possible at that point. I think, and really just having a really clean deal room is probably absolutely the bare minimum.
I get it. All right. Well, one of the things that get scrutinized is the business valuation. Now, I've done SBA valuations myself in over the years. I don't want to say I'm not a fan. I just if the deal pencils out, I mean, I like to think that that's a good indication of whatever the buyer's paying is a decent value. But that's just Ed's pontificating. But one of the things that happened to a lot of sellers is that the business value comes back, and perhaps it doesn't make the deal price. And so what do you do then?
Well, I agree with you. If of all the deals I've seen, when I pencil it out, I don't even think twice. I know this deal's going to appraise. There's very few times where I'm at all concerned. And if I am, it's because already the debt is too tight.
Right.
If the debt's too tight, then it might not pencil. But then I have to remind myself that there's a lot of qualitative things that go into the business valuation, and it is very subjective, right? It's a very subjective report. It's not like we can get real estate comps and figure it out. There's no comps. So I think, what do you do if it comes in short? Well, usually you can, I don't want to say argue, but you can make some more points back. You have to kind of read the thing and see where they felt there was a weakness. And you have to come back with a counterpoint to that. Maybe they misunderstood something. And I would say that I haven't had very many of those happen, but when they have happened, we got the value up by just explaining things better to the valuation.
That's good. Vendor. No, that's a great point. Is that, again, it's back to preparation, because the SIM or whatever is being used as the document as part of the valuation has to be clear enough that the appraiser can follow along. So yeah, all right. So the good news is, what I hear you saying is that you can go back to the appraiser and offer some rebuttal commentary on why or why not this doesn't work. All right.
Yep. It usually works as long as you have a real good point. It usually works. They're trying to do an appraisal of a business from a desktop. So it's easy for them to misunderstand something or miss something.
No, and that's true. And like I said, I'm with you. I mean, if you can make it pencil out, I mean, you kind of feel pretty good about how it's going to land on its way back. Idle loans. I'm curious, that's some cheap debt. So for a lot of sellers that are listening that didn't, participate. I mean, it's the idle is what emergency.
I don't remember.
Idle. Geez.
Disaster loan, DL. I don't remember what the I's were.
Oh my gosh. Any rate, the idle loans, that's 3% money on for 30 years, right? 3.5%. Are you seeing that as an assumable debt? And what do you think? What do you think of that as a manner? It's mezzanine debt, but I shouldn't say mezzanine debt. It's debt that it's cheap money. Yeah. And no way around it. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on if a seller's sitting on, $1 million idle loan, at 3%, why wouldn't the buyer assume that? And from your perspective, how do you make that deal work?
Yeah. So I completely understand why everyone's looking at those loans saying, can't I keep that? I don't want to pay that off. I get it. And I've seen this question floated around, and I've been in SBA lending for a long time. I know one thing about assumability with SBA loans. SBA never releases the initial borrowers or guarantors. They only add more. They don't take your name off. They just put the new guy's name on or gal.
Oh, geez. I didn't know that. Yeah. That's as bad as a lease. Yeah, so we have that conversation a lot. That look, you may with the sellers we work with, if you've got a lease in place, that landlord has no motivation to take you off. So they're going to burn through all of the buyer and the buyer's wherewithal before they get to you, but there's no motivation to release. I didn't know that. That's the same
thing with SBA loans. So in my mind, that makes them not assumable because you're not transferring it to another party at all. You're just adding more parties to it. And it's a really clunky back office for the EIDL. So when we do pay them off, because most of them that's the only way to sell the company is to pay it off that I've seen. You have to pay it off directly on their portal. There's nobody to call. The banks can't like verify anything. You actually pay it off on their portal and take a screenshot and send that to the bank. It's
I know. And well, yeah. I just didn't. Yeah, I had no idea. I thought that was relief for the seller, but I can see that.
Yeah. There's nobody to help you do the docs or anything anyway. So that, I don't even know if you could reach someone at the SBA to put the new borrower on the loan. I mean, I think that would even be probably very difficult to get done.
Well, I was looking, I will find what idle loan.
The problem is you don't have a bank in the middle. So you don't have a back office of a bank. All you have is the government, and they're not really answering that phone anymore. The ideal phone.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm glad, you've said some great things during our time here, but I'll tell you what, that might be a big one, because I know a lot of sellers that have heard that the idle loans are assumable, and
really.
They are, but you're not off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
So are there any, as part of this process, are there any fees that the seller should expect going through this loan process?
Fees for the seller, no, not related to the buyer's loan anyway. The buyer has to pay for their attorney. They're having to pay for their quality of earnings, all their diligence. So, as far as the fees, it's really just whatever their engagement with their own advisors, their attorneys. And, can I say, you probably already say it a million times, but, it's super important that sellers use a M&A attorney, not some other. All attorneys aren't able to do this well. And if you use the wrong kind of attorney, you could be blowing up your own deal and costing yourself a lot of money.
Yep, we just had that conversation on Friday. We had a closing, and it was the docs were rough, and again, the seller good news was represented well. Buyer was not represented well, and again, it was a fairly clean deal, but at the end of the day, that. When that buyer becomes a seller, boy, I hope that party is not part of the deal.
Yeah, a bad attorney can ruin it. They can completely ruin it, or they could just make somebody pay 3 times more attorney fees than they should have, and they really frustrate everybody because they don't understand market terms for these types of deals.
Well, I think I may have told you. We had an attorney once, recently, that asked for, a sample of our documents, and I'm like, you're an attorney. How many times have you done this? And you're asking me for a sample of one of our finished deals? Oh my gosh.
That's
unbelievable. No, it was not. So you had mentioned quality of earnings, and we're seeing that more. And I think that's a good thing, and not a bad thing at all. I wish there was a way. I was talking to Elliot Holland about it, that that the buyer could sell to the seller the quality of earnings to be used down the road. That hey, we did this, it didn't work out for us, but this is a valuable document for you. And I hope, and I like I said, sellers are, as part of the preparation, they should anticipate someone's going to scrutinize them really hard, and someone like Guardian coming in and doing a Q of E is a really, that's a good thing for a buyer. So I guess what I'm asking is, are you seeing more of that being done on from your standpoint? And is the lender that you're working with triggering it, or is it the buyer triggering it?
It's mostly the buyer. So yes, I'm seeing it more, and I'll give you a little history lesson since I've been doing this a long time now. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there were very few Q of E providers focused on smaller companies. They were only kind of upmarket, doing large businesses, true middle market businesses for private equity, and they were charging $30,000 to $50,000, and they still are doing that. But now we've got several vendors who are focused and have the right price point and scope of work for small deals. So that's number one. Is it didn't really exist as a service at the right price point until fairly recently. And second, the buyers are kind of buying into the fact that this is a good idea for them. This is keeping them safe, more so than the banks requiring it. Banks do require it on certain occasions, like let's just say it's a carve out, something where you don't have a standalone tax return, so then you have to have one. But a lot of SBA banks, they still haven't caught on quite to when to require it or should they require it. But most buyers, a lot of buyers, I should say, not most, but a lot, and a growing number and percentage are wanting to do a Q of E to kind of give them peace of mind about the cash flow.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, I think it's a good thing. I did. The funny thing is, we had a regional bank ask for a Q of E and made the buyer pay for it, and that deal didn't go together, and that was $30,000 worth of Q of E work, and I was, everybody was sick about it, and it was like, oh my gosh, in 30 years, I've never seen a bank require a Q of E. I've seen lots of buyers, but I've never seen a bank ask for it, which was, anyway, it is what it is.
It is what it is. And I mean, I guess it depends on what the Q of E came up with. It would be kind of like a business valuation. Did they miss the mark? And if so, you could argue back, or did they find something that wasn't being accounted for correctly? I can certainly look at some businesses and say, I bet you something comes out of this Q of E that's not great. Going in, I can just tell we have a lot of inventory. There's not maybe a great inventory control system, or that's the information we're getting. I would expect that Q of E to adjust the cash flow.
Well, I think that we're seeing, especially in like construction businesses, because those are, those things are. There's a lot of moving parts in those things, and how you treat revenue and expense and WIP. I think those are all real opportunities for someone to kind of scrutinize them, and rightfully so. All right, one of the things that it's funny. All these sellers worry about getting the business back, and I'm sitting here going, there's a 2% default rate. And I mean, you're talking 98% of the deals going together stay together. And it's kind of like seller financing. You just hear about the horror stories. No one talks about how, over the years that's how this stuff works. And selecting a buyer that is, capable financially as well as operationally, that's how this program works. So, but I said I would ask the question. So when you have SBA, all right, you have an SBA loan in front of the seller. So there's either a standby note or there's some sort of seller financing, or the seller has some sort of interest. In this case, as I'm talking about this, I may have already answered my question, but I'll see if you and I are thinking the same. So, how does the seller get back the business or recover any of the value? I mean, can they intercede and say, "Look, I'm here. I will fix this." I can't assume. I guess I got to reapply and get my own business back. But how does a seller do that?
Yeah, so there is a process for what I will call like a short sale, where a buyer has sort of shrunk the earnings down, but it's still positive. There's still profitable business there. It's just smaller than it was. And now maybe it's just got too much of an SBA loan. Okay, so that's a little bit of an over leveraged business. Seller's got a note behind him. You can sell a business to another buyer, and that new buyer can get an SBA loan. But I mean, it's not usually the seller. It's usually a third party. Maybe it's an existing employee. I've seen that done before, where there's a good employee that will step in, do the SBA loan with a personal guarantee, and assume the seller note and get a new, smaller SBA loan. So it kind of brings the leverage into a better position. But you need a really proactive owner, buyer who has taken over. They have to. It's very psychologically difficult for a lot of these buyers to raise their hand and say, "I need help. I'm in a bad spot." A lot of them try to power through it, or maybe they let it just go too far. So the seller would have to have really good communication with their buyer. How are things going? Can I help you with anything? And identify things before it goes too far.
Well, I'm wondering whether or not the equity portion solves that. All right. So if I take a larger seller note, I'm in second position, but you know what? I'm gonna retain 5%, 1%. I don't care what the percentage is. I'm first on the list to get the business back, because I'm a shareholder. That might be the workaround. I don't know.
And as a shareholder, you can say, I want quarterly board meetings, where I can see what's going on and understand.
Well, I think where this stems from is a while back, there was a seller that wanted a first right of refusal, and underwriting would not give them that first right of refusal in their deal. And I don't remember why, but it would be, that would make some deals more palatable if you were the guy or the woman that could just come back in and say, look, all right, it didn't go as planned. Let me see if I can fix it, and I'll do it.
Yeah. I think with really good communication with the new buyer, that is very possible.
All right. Well, I want to be sensitive to your time because you were generous with that. So I want to talk about Viso for a minute, and as I've come to know you, I mean, clearly you're competent, but I guess I want to know what brought you out on your own. What makes you different? I being my age and having seen what I've seen, I'm in a unique position, and I think I see the same unique position you are. And so I want to talk about Viso. So fire away. Tell me about it, how you got into it, what you're going to do with it, and how we can work with you.
Well, thank you for asking. I have been a banker for over 30 years, working at 4 banks directly. And I realized something, and that is when I'm representing just one bank, I can only represent one point of view. And that really limits, the types of deals I might be able to do or the types of situations I might be able to assist with. And I see this small business acquisition market continuing to grow. And I don't think it's driven entirely by people retiring. The way it sort of got started maybe was that. But I think where we are now is that there's enough liquidity, there's enough buyers, there's just a critical mass has been reached that we've made it possible to buy and sell businesses. You can sell a business if you're younger, and you don't have to wait till retirement. You could decide for a variety of reasons that you want to sell a business. So I think that's kind of just driving all of this growth. And I believe I can serve the whole community better if I can represent lots of lenders and lots of points of view for these deals.
I got it. So the lenders and that's always been a kind of a question, is how do you select the lenders? I mean, because all lenders aren't created equal. I can tell you in our community, I can tell you who's more conservative, who has the appetite for what kind of deal. So I'm just curious to know, how do you select it, or do you have an RFP that goes out to all of them, or is it, hey, I know just by virtue of who I am and what I've done over the years, I know who the handful of people that this is going to appeal to?
A lot of it is that, Ed. A lot of it is just simply my years in the business and my network, and just knowing I can pick up the phone. It's not even just that they'll have the appetite for it, but that they will give this deal the attention it deserves. They have the capacity for it right now, and they will be responsive and get it done. So that's all part of kind of my own thought process. But I also keep a database. And I keep that populated with not just what they say they'll do, but with what they're actually doing and how they're changing. They do change. That's the other thing. It gets harder to track because every bank changes their credit appetite from time to time. And I also work with a partner company called Lumos Data, and they use the SBA Freedom of Information Act database for all kinds of really cool things with banks. And let's just say I get a deal in the landscaping industry. I will use their data to see who are the lenders who did the most landscaping deals.
That's fun to say.
Yeah. And then I know that those lenders understand that industry, and sometimes that's the right bank to pick.
Well, the funny thing is they are coming on the podcast here in a couple of weeks. So
cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting because same kind of thing. I'm totally with you that the landscape, the buying and selling landscape is going to be so much more data driven, and who's the right tool for the job. And yeah, I'm really stoked to know that you're partnered with it. That's a great organization. I've heard nothing but great things about them.
They're awesome. And data is awesome. The more we have actual facts, to back up what we're doing is just super helpful.
All right. Now for the hard part of the interview. So crystal ball. All right. Tell me this time next year, what do we have going with the SBA? And I won't hold you to this. You're on the internet. You can say anything you want.
Right. Exactly. What is it going to be like a year from now? I think that we've just seen a very big rule change. So I think a year from now, we're going to see how that plays out in terms of what situations will the banks use that in? When will they allow rollover equity and how much? We don't know yet. So a year from now, we might have the answer to that. Like which banks are comfortable with these new rules and are applying it to different situations? Is it opening the door? Like I said, for me, like maybe slowly buying into a business now that it's possible, maybe we'll see more of that where someone can buy 25%, then buy the other 25, whatever it might be that makes sense for that particular deal. I think it'll mean more deals get done because we have more options, definitely. And I think that, we'll have another year of credit performance to look at that data to see if the default rate ticked up a little bit. My guess is it will a little bit, not a lot, not dramatically, but rates are very high. And, defaults happen even in good times, because these are small companies and things happen. So I think it'll be up, but it'll only be up a little bit. And I think everyone will kind of be 1 year better about how to do all of this safely.
I agree. And you brought something up as far as like the fractional interest buyouts. From a valuation standpoint, oh my gosh, with discounts and premiums for fractional interest, I'm sitting here going, oh my gosh, how are they ever going to calculate that? And if I'm a minority shareholder, who's going to govern distributions? So if I'm 75 and you're 25, I can control this. And so I can control the distributions, and subsequently I can control your repayment. So it'll be real interesting to see how that part works. Yeah. All right. Anyway, you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, one thought I do have, and that is, I think with some of these situations, whether it's third-party investors or the seller rolling some equity, I think one of the solutions might be using like a controller type service, the ones that host your QuickBooks, and having everybody have visibility day to day into the books. So that there's better monitoring, create some dashboards so they could look at it on their phone and make sure that their investment is being handled, or their loan or whatever is going okay.
I get it. All right, back to the crystal ball. So election year, we always know everybody has big promises. So yeah, anything for I guess that would be 25. Any revelations there?
I've been pleasantly surprised that regardless of which party is in power, the SBA has been pretty well supported. There was a time way back when that wasn't necessarily the case. Right. One party was not supportive and one party was. Now they're both pretty supportive, and we've always been able to get good funding. So I think that there's a general consensus that this is good for the country, good for the economy. So I don't think the election matters, except for one thing, that it's real difficulty every year end. If anybody talks about raising capital gains, even if they just talk about it, because remember, politicians talk about a lot of stuff that never actually happens.
Right.
But every time that gets talked about, it puts it under a magnifying glass, and people get really worried that they need to close the deal, before a certain date. So, I think that adds it adds some urgency to some closings every time we get near an election cycle, because that becomes a talking point somewhere. Yeah.
And again, I'm with you. I think that I do believe that same sentiment that, this whole wealth transfer thing, this is really, these are taxable events. And if things are going well and businesses are you've got a 2% default rate. You're able to aid, subsequent generations or subsequent buyers that are, a generation behind to buy these things. Oh my gosh. I mean, I do foresee an easier way to get perhaps some community incentives, some of the tax breaks. I wish that would be a little bit easier for and faster for buyers to be able to say, all right, I can immediately add value. Not only am I buying this, but I'm pick whatever the savings is. All right. All right. I asked this question with every person I've ever had on the podcast. So what's the one piece of advice that you would give to business owners that would have the most immediate impact, or the most immediate impact or the biggest impact on their business when they go to sell?
Well, that's planning ahead, and that's not running too many personal expenses through the business before you're going to sell. In those couple of years leading up to it, it makes the numbers really messy for lenders to get behind if they're adding a lot of stuff back. And sometimes it's adding back things they can't really verify. Mm-hmm. So if you want to maximize the value of your business, that amount you're saving on taxes is probably less than the multiple you could get paid on the earnings. And I think I would just look at it, that simple math that way. I know it's nice to not pay taxes. It's fun, but it's just from a sheer value perspective, you're going to get more out of not doing that as much.
I got it. All right. What's the where can we find you?
I am I'm on Twitter as Endresen Heather, and I am on LinkedIn, and I have a website called visocap.net, visocap.net.
Okay, and I will have all these links and everywhere to find you in the show notes.
Thank you.
So Heather, I am so glad to have visited with you. I've been looking forward to this, and yeah, it's been, you certainly delivered everything I had hoped you would. So thanks for being on.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Thank you for joining us today on the How to Sell Your Business podcast. If you want more episodes packed with strategies to help sell your business for the maximum value, visit howtosellabusinesspodcast.com for tips and best practices to make your exit life-changing. Better yet, subscribe now so you never miss future episodes. This program is copyrighted by Miso Inc. All rights reserved.